Okay, guys, this is Chapter 9, Love and Sexuality. The developmental course of adolescent love. Love relationships among American adolescents tend to follow a developmental sequence of 4 steps. One of which is, and if you remember correctly, when we were talking about peers and friends, this will sound similar in the lecture that I was talking about. So, one, adolescents in same gender groups go to places where they hope to find other gender groups. 2, adolescents take part in social gatherings that are arranged by adults, such as parties, things like that. Mixed gender groups arrange to go out to some particular event together, such as going to a movie. I mean, times have changed now, but that will probably go back to that once coronavirus is gone. And then 4, adolescent couples begin to date as pairs in activities such as movies, dinners, concerts, and so on. One of the reasons adolescents date basically is for practice. Being able to practice how to date and then to help mature in relationships. Now, why adolescents form love relationships? You got recreation, so having something fun and enjoyable to do. Learning, like I said, becoming more skilled at dating and the dating interactions. Status, to impress others according to how often and whom one dates. You think you're the man when you're dating somebody and everybody's looking at you like you're the man. So, companionship. Next, sharing pleasurable activities with another person. Intimacy, establishing a close emotional relationship with another person. And courtship, seeking someone to have a steady partner. Being with somebody, almost like having a commitment in a way. In adolescence, yes, it still can be considered a commitment in adolescence. It's maybe not as much of a commitment as it is as you get older. Romantic relationships in emerging adulthood tend to change as adolescents enter into emerging adulthood. So, one of the things that you see is what's called a dating script. Ding, ding, ding. You never know. You may see that in the exam. You have the proactive script that is usually the males tend to follow this type of script. So it includes initiating the date, deciding where to go, controlling the public domain like driving the car, and initiating sexual contact. Now, things over time have changed and things are a little different, but this is basically where we're at. More or less, let's put it that way. The reactive script tends to be followed by the female. It focuses on personal domains like grooming and dress, responding to the male's gesture in a public domain, responding to his sexual initiatives, for instance. Sternberg came up with the concept, his theory of love, Robert Sternberg. So ding, 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 he's definitely on your test. Different types of love involve a combination of 3 fundamental qualities of love in different ways. So you have the 3 qualities are passion, so involves physical attraction and sexual desire. Intimacy, which involves feeling of closeness and emotional attachment. And commitment, the pledge to love someone over a long period of time. Now, one of the things you have to understand, and this is something a lot of adolescents wouldn't understand, but all 3 of these things change throughout the relationship. And if you believe that you love the person you're with as much as they love you or vice versa, that's not necessarily accurate. Also, the passion may change. So people think, oh, I'm going to have sex all the time. No, as you get older, things change. Or when you get busy or you have children, that may change. Your intimacy, you may have heard this term before, but I love you, but I don't like you right now. So intimacy may change over time, and as we know, with our divorce rate being so high, and one of the reasons for divorce is cheating, for instance, that commitment isn't always there 100%. So you have to remember that. Now, forms of love. You have liking, you have infatuation, you have empty love, you have romantic love. You'll see this in your text, so make sure you look at it. Other forms, companion love, fascist love, and consummate love. Excuse me, when you apply Sternberg to adolescence, in most of the adolescent love relationships, commitment is either missing or highly tentative. The absence of long-term commitment in adolescence means that there are two principal types of adolescent love: infatuation and romantic love. Now, adolescent passion in non-Western cultures, of 186 traditional cultures, and this study is in your text, representing 6 distinct geographical regions around the world, it was found that there was evidence that young people fell passionately in love in all but one of the cultures. However, this doesn't mean that young people in all cultures are allowed to act on the feelings of love. And on the contrary, romantic love as a basis for marriage is a fairly new cultural idea. A lot of times in some of these cultures, you have what we call arranged marriages. Think about that. Put it in the discussion section. Would you like an arranged marriage? Yes, their divorce rate is a lot lower, but there is repercussions of divorce in some cultures. So always remember that. Falling in love. You all felt that butterflies in the stomach. Oh, I'm so in love. Consensual validation. People like to find in others an agreement or consensus with their own characteristics. Finding this consensus supports it, or validates, I should say, their own way of looking at the world. It's interesting. There are 2 ways people get attracted to another individual: similarity and proximity. Think about how many of you have dated somebody you either worked with or lived near or were around your family. Also think about how many people you've dated that had similar interests as you. So similarity, proximity. Now, people of all ages tend to have romantic relationships with people who are similar to them in characteristics such as intelligence, social class, ethnic backgrounds, religious beliefs, and physical attractions. Attachment styles are key here, and we've talked about attachment in this class already. Attachment styles between lovers have been found to resemble the parent-child attachment styles. So you have the secured attachment or secure attachment. It's characterized by emotional support and concern for the partner's well-being. You have anxious ambivalent. This is characterized by over-dependence on the romantic partner, along with insensitivity to the partner's needs. You may have had somebody in your life like that, the jealous person, things like that. And then the anxious avoidant, which involves keeping emotional distance from the romantic partner and inhibiting self-disclosure. So basically not getting close to an individual, not telling them about yourself, things like that. Now, Brown did a study, and Brown discusses this in your text. It was done in 1998. He came up with 3 phases. The initiation phase, the first tentative exploration of love, usually superficial, brief, and often fraught with anxiety, fear, and excitement. You remember that first time you ever dated somebody, how scared you might have been. Second is the status phase, where you begin to gain confidence the adolescent does, in their interactions or their interaction skills with potential romantic partners. They remain acutely aware of the evaluation of their friends and peers. Are you watching me? I want to make sure my friends are checking me out, that I have a girlfriend now. And affection phase. They come to know each other better and express deeper feelings. They begin to engage in more extensive sexual activity. And 4, the bonding phase. This usually occurs in emerging adulthood, so not necessarily during adolescence, but during emerging adulthood. The romantic relationship becomes more enduring and serious. Partners begin to discuss the possibility of lifelong commitments, for instance. Now, when love goes bad, here's your next question for the discussion section on Canvas. How can adolescent egocentrism and the personal fable contribute to feelings of breaking up? Make sure you put your response on there. I would like to see it. So, moving on to emerging adults breaking up. 2-year study of 200 college couples. You'll see this in your text also. 45% of the couples had broken up. Those who had broken up reported lower levels of intimacy and love, were less likely to be similar on characteristics such as age, SAT scores, and physical attractiveness. Were less balanced. One partner indicated substantially more commitment to the relationship than the other. If you remember what I talked about before about commitment and things like that, Sternberg's theory that these 3 things can change at different points of the relationship, and that there's always one person that loves the other more. Now, it's interesting. Women were more likely to end the relationship in this study. Rejected men tend to be lonelier, unhappier, and more depressed than the rejected women were. Rejected men found it harder than the rejected women to accept the end of the relationship and to stay friends. I've always thought that was a little strange because staying friends with your exes, it can be very difficult, especially for new relationships to deal with. It does happen, but at least in my experience, it's not necessarily something I would want to do. Interesting. 90% of people in most societies eventually marry. We do in this culture have a high rate of divorce. It's actually touched about 50%, a little bit over 50% at this point. It's interesting that if you are divorced, it's more likely than somebody that's never been divorced to get divorced a second time, or I should say, it's more you have a higher percentage chance of becoming divorced a second time. And actually, it's interesting that it can happen within the first year of that marriage. Choosing a marriage partner. A study done in your text, well, not done in your text, but it is in your text. 10,000 young people, I should say, in 37 different countries from all over the world: Africa, Asia, Eastern and Western Europe, and North and South America. The findings in that study were that... actually, you know what? You guys look at that. I'm going to move on to something else. I want you guys to see the findings to that study, okay? Arranged marriages. We were talking about that earlier in the lecture. Although romantic love is found in all cultures, it's not considered the proper basis of marriage in all cultures. Marriage has more often been seen as an alliance between two families rather than as a uniting of two individuals. And this arranged marriage could start at birth, even. The most important considerations in an arranged marriage is the other's family status, religion, and wealth. They need to be similar. Let's put it that way. You're not going to see somebody in the higher caste system marrying somebody in the lower caste system. Cohabitation. In the U.S. as well as in Northern Europe, cohabitation before marriage is now experienced by at least 2/3 of emerging adults. The percentage is highest in Sweden, where nearly all young people at some point or another cohabitate before marriage. In the U.S., cohabitation tends to be brief and unstable. In contrast, cohabitating couples in European countries tend to stay together as long as married couples do. And it's interesting, in the United States, cohabitation actually has a higher percentage chance of the relationship ending than non-cohabitating couples. It's pretty interesting, huh? So, ethnic differences. The proportion of high school students. And this is not about cohabitation. This is moving on to another topic. So, ethnic differences. The proportion of high school students in grades 9 through 12 who had intercourse is lowest for white adolescents at 49%, somewhat higher for Latino adolescents at 58%, and highest for African American adolescents at 73%. Research has indicated that Asian Americans are considerably less likely to engage in sexual activity in adolescence compared with any other major American ethnic group. Cultural beliefs and adolescent sexuality. We have different types of cultures. You have restrictive cultures, where there's a strong prohibition on adolescent sexual activity before marriage, a strict separation of the boys and the girls. They may include the threat of physical punishment or public shaming for premarital sex. In some countries, even looking at the opposite sex can get you publicly shamed. Usually it's more restrictive for the girls than the boys. As we know, we've talked about this. The girls in some of these cultures are not necessarily treated very well. Semi-restrictive cultures. Prohibition is not strongly enforced and easily evaded. If pregnancy results from premarital sex, adolescents are often forced to marry. And then you have the permissive cultures. Encourages and expects adolescent sexuality. Sexual behavior is even encouraged in childhood. in some of these permissive cultures. Now, if you know anything about the American majority culture, we would be considered a semi-restrictive culture based on how much religious influence a person has in their life. Now, sexual scripts, just like dating scripts, there are sexual scripts. There's different different cognitive frameworks for understanding how a sexual experience is supposed to proceed and how sexual experiences are to be interpreted. For example, boys are expected to make the move. Girls are expected to set the limits on how far the sexual episode is allowed to progress. Don't get me wrong, as times go on, things may change in that, but we're still in a point where this is still going on. Sexual activity in adolescence, characteristics of non-virgins. Similar self-esteem as the virgins. Similar overall life satisfaction as virgins. Now, on the other hand, characteristics of the non-virgins, they are more likely to be early maturing. They tend to have lower levels of academic performance and academic aspirations. Now, adolescents who have sex, earlier than 15 years are seen as possible earlier users of drug and alcohol, are more likely to be from a single-parent household, and are more likely to have grown up in poverty in some way. Sexual harassment. This includes a wide range of behaviors from mild harassment, such as name-calling, jokes, and leering looks, to severe harassment involving unwanted touching or sexual contact. It is estimated that over half of American women will experience some form of sexual harassment at some time during their professional life. That's sad. Date rape is one form of sexual harassment that takes place when a person, usually a woman, is forced by a romantic partner, date, or acquaintance to have sexual relations against her will. 15% of adolescent girls and 25% of emerging adult women have experienced date rape. Alcohol can play a big part in date rape on college campuses. You see higher rates of date rape on college campuses than really most anywhere else. Now, I'm not saying totally, but most. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual adolescents, the degree of confusion and anxiety is often multiplied for these individuals. They are exposed to almost entirely to heterosexual models of dating, love, and sex. The presumption of heterosexuality is part of their socialization from parents, from friends, school, and even media. It is during adolescence that most gay, lesbian, and bisexual people become fully aware of their sexual orientation. Excuse me. Coming out in most Western cultures, gay, lesbian, and bisexual adolescents commonly engage in the process of coming out. It involves a person recognizing his or her own sexual identity and then disclosing the truth to a friend, family, and others. Homophobia is the fear and hatred of homosexuals. There is a lot of phobias towards people, trans people, for instance, homosexuals, and so forth. It's pretty sad, but that's what goes on in our society even still today. Even though things are becoming a little bit more open, it's still there. Because of this phenomenon, coming to the realization of a gay, lesbian, and bisexual identity can be traumatic for many of the adolescents. Okay, moving on. Why do most sexually active adolescents fail to use a contraception consistently? You tell me your answer in the discussion section on Canvas. But think about this. Think about infrequency of sex, cognitive development, personal fable. Oh, it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to get this person pregnant. And embarrassment. Contraception use and non-use. There are two types of countries that have low rates of teenage pregnancy. Those that are permissive about adolescent sex and those that are adamantly forbid adolescent sex. The permissive countries, some of them like Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, they have explicit safe sex campaigns. Adolescents have easy access to contraception. In the restrictive countries like Japan, South Korea, Morocco, adolescents are strongly discouraged from even dating. And it's rare for boys and girls to spend time alone together. A lot of times it's with parents or some form of chaperone. Now, some facts about the facts of life. About 30% of pregnancies to American adolescents end in abortion. 14% of adolescents miscarry. Of the children that are born, only about 5% are put up for adoption. That means about 50% of adolescents raise their own children, sometimes with the help of the father, but most often with the help of the adolescent's own mother, I should say. It's pretty sad how things work, or how things have been working. Now, what about those teen moms? They're twice as likely to drop out of school. They're less likely to go to college or become employed. Less likely to get married. More likely to get divorced if they do get married. Do they catch up? A sample a study that was done in that's written in your text of 300 mothers. 5 years after giving birth, teenage mothers still lagged behind their peers in educational, occupational, and economic progress. After 18 years, 25% were still on welfare, 25% had succeeded in making it into the middle class, a majority had eventually completed high school, 33% had completed at least some college education. Now, what about the dads? There's a different story here with the dads. Being a teenage dad, it's is related to a variety of negative outcomes too. More likely to become divorced, lower level of education, lower paying job, more prone to drug and alcohol use, more likely to violate the law, and have more feelings of anxiety and depression. What about the baby? Well, children born to adolescent mothers face a higher likelihood of a variety of difficulties in life. Babies are more likely to be born premature, have a lower birth rate. Premature and low birth rates are related to a variety of physical and intellectual problems also. Greater likelihood of behavioral problems, school misbehavior, delinquency, and early sexual activity. Sexuality in emerging adulthood. Sex is viewed as a normal part of life by emerging adults. Parents are less opposed to sex among emerging adults than they are to adolescents. Few expect to get married before their mid-20s. There's a great deal of diversity among emerging adults in terms of sexual behavior. The most common pattern among American 18 to 24-year-olds is to have had at least one partner in the past year. About 1/3 of the same group reported 2 or more partners in the past year. And at 18, about half of Americans had intercourse at least once. Sexual behavior commonly takes place in close romantic relationships. Emerging adults today are more likely than older adults to engage in recreational sex. Now, having sex, you put yourself at risk of pregnancy, but also sexually transmitted diseases. By age 24, 1 in 3 sexually active Americans has contracted an STD. 2/3 of all STDs occur in people who are under 25. 2 important characteristics of STDs. You have asymptomatic, where people show no signs of the disease. They are especially likely to infect others because neither they nor others realize they are infected. Latency period. There may be years between the time people are infected and the time they begin to show symptoms. During this time, they may be infecting others without either themselves or their partners being aware of it. It's interesting. People can carry HIV, for instance, throughout their life and never know they have it unless they're tested for it. They may never show signs and still continue to spread it to others. Chlamydia is among the most common STDs. Highest rates among 15 to 9-year-olds. Leading cause of female infertility. Human papilloma virus. Most common STD. 1/3 of American women can be infected by age 24, or will be infected by age 24. Infected cells on the surface of the body. Now, there are 2, or I should say it infects cells on the surface of the body. There are 2 categories here. You have asymptomatic, which is 80% of cases, and genital warts. For women, there's an increased risk of developing cervical cancer with HPV. Herpes simplex. It's caused by a virus. Has two variations, herpes simplex 1 and herpes simplex 2. It's highly infectious. 75% of those exposed to an infected person will become infected. There's no cure for herpes, but there is a medication, and I have to say I love the medication commercials for Valtrex. Just they make me laugh. Like, for instance, there's a couple, and one says, he's got it, but I don't. And they have a big smile on their face. It always made me laugh at that commercial. I'd be like, she has it, I'm out of here, kind of thing. Not to be rude, but I'm sorry, when I see that commercial, it just makes me laugh. Now, another sexually transmitted disease or infection we need to discuss is HIV and AIDS. It strips the body of its ability to fend off infections. The body is highly vulnerable to a wide variety of diseases. Now, I've worked in this field, and one of the things you would notice is that a common cold can kill a person with AIDS, full-blown AIDS, which we'll talk about in a second. 90% of cases of HIV in the U.S. result from intercourse between homosexual or bisexual partners, but that outside the U.S., HIV and AIDS is spread mainly between heterosexual partners. Back in the 80s, they believed it was a homosexual disease. They actually called it GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, which is not actually accurate. In other countries, that's not the case. It has a long latency period. People tend to be asymptomatic up to 5 years. AIDS is the leading cause of death worldwide among persons 25 to 45 years of age. Actually not accurate. AIDS does not kill anybody. It's those opportunistic infections, the killing off of the immune system, and they can't fight the common cold or flu or something like that. A lot of times, two of the things that actually kill people that have AIDS is Kaposi sarcoma, which is a type of cancer, and pneumocystis pneumonia, which is a type of pneumonia. It's interesting. We look at T cells when you look at HIV and AIDS, and once the T cell count goes 200 or below, that's when somebody is considered a full-blown AIDS. 10 of every 11 new HIV infection worldwide come from Africa. The mortality rate for people who have AIDS remains extremely high. Now, medications have gotten better, and we have what's called a protease inhibitor cocktail. So some people may test negative even though they still carry the virus because of how good the medications have become. That's why Magic Johnson basically has tested positive in the last 10 years, negative in the last 10 years, because he's been on the protease inhibitor cocktails for a long time, and it lowers the therapeutic level of the virus. So with a test, it may not necessarily hit the level that needs to be hit to test positive, even though he still carries the virus. Now, sex education. Americans agree that rates of premarital pregnancy and STDs in adolescents are a serious problem that must be reduced. However, there are disagreements about what is the best solution. One side says comprehensive sexuality education. The other side, abstinence promotion. So there's been fights in schools and things like that. I had sex ed a long time ago and basically only learned how to put a condom on a banana. We didn't learn that much in sex ed. It has gotten more expansive now, but a lot of schools, there's fights between parents, or parents are allowed to sign a consent form to opt out of sex ed, so that their kids do not get exposed to that because they want to have them abstain or be the ones to teach them. Sex education, 10 characteristics of an effective program. One, it focuses narrowly on reducing one or more sexual behavior. 2, base the program on a theoretical approach for other risky behaviors. 3, give a clear message about sexual activity and contraceptive use. 4, provide basic, accurate information about risks and methods. 5, include activities that teach how to deal with social pressures. 6, model and provide practice in negotiation and refusal skills. 7, use a variety of teaching methods. 8, incorporate behavioral goals specific to age, culture, and sexual experience. 9, run the program over a sufficient period of time. And 10, train teachers, youth workers, and peer leaders who believe in the program. Now, that is it for the chapter. If you guys have questions, concerns, or anything like that, please let me know on Canvas. Make sure you continue to complete your Rebel quizzes, and don't forget your end dates for your exams. Okay? Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next chapter lecture.